morning, everyone. Welcome to our Day of Ecuador at Harvard. Today, we're gonna be presenting a lot of panels and discussion panels with different personalities from the academic world and also from the government of Ecuador and also academics from another universities. The Day of Ecuador at Harvard is gonna the title of the Day of Ecuador at Harvard is Breaking the Natural Resources Dependence. Is it possible? A vision from the middle of the world. In order to start our day, please let's give a warm welcome to Ambassador Natalie Selly.
Good morning. It's working, right?
Yes.
Good morning. Buenos dias. How are you doing? I'm really happy and delighted to be here. And would like to particularly say thanks to the Ecuadorian Harvard Students Association for working so hard and to make this possible. Last weekend, I was here for other purposes, and the President Correa was here at campus, and I think you have many of you have the opportunity to listen to him at the forum and to discuss with him the economic model that we are implementing in Ecuador. Thank you also to our host and partner in today's event, Harvard's David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, for your commitment in making this event happen and for recognizing the importance of the issues that we're going to discuss today. They are important not just for Ecuador and Latin America, but we believe also for the whole world. Being here today is very special for me for a few reasons. As I told you, earlier in my career, I had the pleasure of attending the JF School of Government here at Harvard. I received my master's degree here. Also, while studying here for the following year and a half working at the Center for International Development on an issue that is very close to my heart, how to foster growth and equality, which we're talking today. And I was an amazing and a transformative experience, and one that has contributed greatly to all that I have been able to accomplish for the people of Ecuador over the past 7 years. 2 weeks ago, as I told you, I have the opportunity also to return to campus several times, both to meet with some of your leaders about this event and also to accompany the President of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, who you may have heard speak at the JFK Forum. We all know that as we look to the future here in the greater Boston area, that we also must remember that what happened here 1 year ago. I would like to take a few minutes to tell you that I have really witnessed the amazing spirit of the people of Boston, who I admire so much. I have seen the strength and the compassion with which you have handled unspeakably adversity and the sacrifice you have selflessly made to help your friends, neighbors, and strangers. I'm truly in awe of this community, and again, I extend the well wishes of my government and the people of Ecuador to everyone affected by the tragedy. I hope out of such a tragedy, there can be some good that emerges, and I know Boston will always be strong. Friends and guests, what I wanted to talk to you about today is about how Ecuador is learning from the mistakes and the challenges of the past to create a hopeful, vibrant, and sustainable future for the people of our country. And we hope the world also can learn from the lessons that we have learned. As you may know, Ecuador is a country of 50 million people located in the equator along the Pacific coast of South America. We are one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, home of the Galapagos Islands, the Amazon rainforest, the Andean mountains, and long coastal stretches. Our location by the equator, coupled with the Andean mountains, make our climate especially fertile for all forms of flora and fauna. We have identified as one of the 17 megadiverse countries in the world. Just one of our national parks in the Amazon rainforest has most species of frogs, toads, and threads that the entire continental. Okay, I'm sorry. That the entire continental US and Canada combined. Ecuador is a country small in size, but truly rich in biodiversity and natural resources. This duality led us to a dilemma for our country. How do we find a balance between developing our society and taking care of the needs of our people in one hand and protecting our environment in the other? How do we do the best to develop an alternative development model, such as the idea of a good buen vivir, or good living in English? That places nature at the center of our society, not only protecting nature, but also transitioning to a new path of development based on knowledge learned from our biodiversity. This is what we call bio-knowledge or bioindustry society. And these developments, dilemmas, are also faced by many other countries around the world. But Ecuador's unique richness of biodiversity makes them much more acute. Today, we believe that we have found a better balance between development and protection of our people and environment. Is that what I would like to call a third wave of development in the South? Highlighted in the 2008, when the people of Ecuador ratified the first national constitution in the world to enshrine the rights of nature. This was more than a symbolic gesture. It reflected a national consensus that our whole approach to growing our country and protecting the environment, including ourselves, must change and adapt if we're going to make this planet a place where we can live freely and safely. However, we did not arrive to this third way of path easily. Actually, the path to get there where we are today was long and costly in so many levels. To fully understand the model of sustainable development Ecuador is pursuing today, it's necessary to understand the country's complicated history with oil, which has been both a blessing and a curse. When oil was first discovered in Ecuador in the 1950s and the 1960s, our country was lacking in strong institutions, standard, and oversight. For decades, transnational corporations took advantage of our country's institutional weakness as related to the public sector and lacks also international standards for business compliance with human rights protections and regulations. Oil companies took advantage of this dynamic and also, I think, irresponsible extraction of natural resources, inadequate methods of remediation, and lack of financial compensation for victims of corporate responsibility harm not only human life, but also the environment. Arguably, the most egregious example is the case of Texaco and Chevron, almost 25 years in Ecuador. Beginning in 1964, Texaco was part of a consortium of oil companies in Ecuador and was the sole operator with exclusive responsibility for exploring, extracting, and managing the oil operation of Amazon's rainforest. Texaco, which later merged with Chevron in 2001, operated in Ecuador using methods and technologies that were obsolete and non-environmental friendly, contrary to the technologies used by the same company in other parts of the world. Texaco operated all 356 wells that were drilled by the consortium, and it's estimated that more than 800 pits were excavated to bury the sludge and contaminated material produced in the drilling. Millions of gallons of waste water and produced water were dumped in the rivers proximate to the oil well operations. As a result of these practices, there had been multiple legal actions presented in courts around the world. For more than a decade, a group of indigenous plantees from the affected rainforest region were embroiled in a private legal battle with Texaco Chevron. And despite this legal labyrinth that stretches from Ecuador to New York to California, back to Ecuador, Canada, Brazil, and even The Hague, Chevron still refuses to pay the remediation and is continuously seeking legal refuges to avoid assuming responsibility. The legal battle has now embroiled the government of Ecuador via the terms of bilateral investment treaties between Ecuador and the United States. And I believe you're going to have a panel today that is going to reflect in how the current framework, investor-state arbitration framework, is flawless and how it's not conducted to find justice, and it's lacking of transparency, and it needs to really revamp it. And I'm looking forward to listen what the panel have to say about this system. In September 2009, Ecuador received notice for an arbitration process before the Permanent Court of Arbitration of The Hague under UNCITRAL arbitration rules, in which Chevron claimed denial of justice, unfair and unequal treatment, and discrimination by Ecuador. This case is currently expected to run until at least April 2015. If Chevron wins, the government and people of Ecuador may be liable for the amount of $9 billion, which is the Chevron award in Ecuador. I mean, that's how what is at stake. And I thought this case was interesting for what you're going to reflect during the day. Although the final results of these cases are related and related appeals are still pending, the history of Ecuador's relationship with Texaco Chevron, and how the bilateral investment treaty has been used in ways never originally foreseen, have taught Ecuador many lessons about how to balance development and sustainability. These lessons have helped Ecuador to find a third way of development that I had mentioned earlier. Today, Ecuador has set out on a reversible path towards a stronger and more inclusive democracy with solid institutions that protect all, including vulnerable indigenous populations and the natural environment. Where the international community has lagged, we have stepped up and created our own framework to protect our environment and set the standards for responsible and sustainable economic growth and development. Ecuadorians are now aware for the enormous responsibility they have in order to protect biodiversity for future generations, which is why we are implementing a new development model called Buen Vivir, or Good Living, based on the ancestral Quechua philosophy of balancing the satisfactions of our needs with nature. Based on this philosophy, Ecuador took the unprecedented step in 2008 of providing constitutional rights to nature. This was not an easy task, but it was showing results. In 2013, the National Judicial Council registered 570 cases filed in connection with crimes against nature, of which 278 had been resolved. But perhaps most importantly, Ecuador has focused now on transitioning to a knowledge-based economy and energy matrix, not dependent on oil and resources. This is a long-term process, but we are actively building pathways that allow further technological development, investment in human talent, and a strengthening of the research capacity needed to change our production and energy matrix. Our economic and innovative revolution has focused on promoting education, science, and technology, something that we're going to discuss today in the afternoon, to generate knowledge and human talent. To that end, we have undertaken a throughout reform of higher education and educational restructuring in order to promote the formation of advanced human talent and the development of research, innovation, and technology transfer. I'm going to skip all the notes that I have about education because you have here our Minister of Education. She served for many years in Ecuador, not only with this government, but with the previous government. And I think it's one of the areas where we have shown most result. And also we have the Minister Coordinator of Social Development here. Also, we have launched four universities, and I believe that we're going to have a panel that's going to focus in one of them, which is Jachai, our northern, which is located in the northern part of the country, and it's an old planned city, which is going to focus on life science and technology. And we have another one that is Iquian, that is in the rainforest, that's going to focus also in our biodiversity, in how we can take sustainable advantage of that. Today, Ecuador has charted a difficult course, but one that is necessary and mindful of the complexity of our goals, building our country, economy, and investment environment, and elevating the quality of life for our citizens, all while holding as equally important our duty to be the best stewards that we can be on earth and the space that we have been given. We intend to prove through our example that profitable and responsible are not mutually exclusive, and the first fruits of these efforts are beginning to show. The hard lessons we have learned in Ecuador must not be forgotten. They are instructive to countries in every region of the world. But more importantly, our ambitious path forward cannot be completed alone. It requires a strategic international allies and partners who share our vision and who will partner with us in this challenging process. We believe that in the areas of education, science, and technology, exchange and cooperation between the United States and Ecuador can deliver benefits for both of our countries. Such partnerships can help all of us create jobs, strengthen our economies, protect our environments, and pave a path to prosperity for the millions of families whom we serve. Ecuador welcomes further dialogue to find areas of cooperation. Together we can share and create innovative and effective solutions to tackling our generation's most daunting challenges. I am looking forward to the discussions we will have today. There are no easy answers. We still have many unresolved questions. Many models are still being evaluated to find the best way to bring international private investors and partners into a transition to a bioknowledge-based economy. Other questions remain. For instance, will a scanning model to search for the most effective biogenetic material to cure diseases be more effective? Do we still there? Or do we miss the boat? Should we learn from the Malaysia experience? So I'm looking forward to the biotechnology or a panel where you're going to discuss this path. I'm really curious, and I'm very skeptical to see which will be the model that will work for Ecuador. How we can conduct this type of research more effectively. How we can achieve a critical mass of bioengineers and scientists in our society. How we can make sure that we can attract them back. We have sent them to the top universities in the world, but how we can make sure that we can attract them and stay in Ecuador and work there. I'm pretty sure that the discussions today will be of a great value to fine-tuning these models. Thank you all for your time today, and I hope that I can one day welcome you all to Ecuador, particularly to the ones that have not been there. Ecuador is a uniquely beautiful country that is committed to progress, equality, and prosperity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's continue. We will have our first panel, an economic perspective of the natural resource course and its implications for a developing country. Francisco Monaldi is going to be our moderator today for this panel. Francisco is a visiting professor of public policy and senior research fellow of the Geopolitics of Energy Project and the Environment and Natural Resources program at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He holds a PhD in political science from Stanford University, a master in international and development economics from Yale University, and a BA in economics from Universidad Católica Andrés Bello. He is also adjunct professor of international energy policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and non-resident fellow of the James Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. He is full professor at the Instituto de Estudios Superiores de Administración in Caracas, Venezuela. Co-founder and director of IESA Center on Energy and Environment, Professor Monaldi is leading scholars on the politics and economics of the oil industry in Latin America and developing countries.
Thank you very much. Should I use this? Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you to the ambassador and to Sandy Naranjo from the Ecuadorian Student Association for this invitation. I am very pleased to be here. I am very fond of Ecuador, have very good friends in Ecuador, have worked with Ecuadorian academics in the past, and I think your country, as has been said, is one of the most beautiful countries and diverse countries, and I really like to go there. So our panel today, we have a very interesting panel, as it was said, is on a perspective on the natural resource curse and its implication for a developing country. And we have two very good panelists, Professor Frankel and Professor Falconi, who is coming, is going to arrive. We have first Professor Frankel, so we will have time for him to arrive. And I will present them in just a second, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, the issue. I think, this term natural resource curse has become a sort of a very common term, and I think between the 70s and the 90s, it sort of became an accepted knowledge that the idea that natural resources, and in particular oil, which is one of the big resources that Ecuador has, was sort of a curse, sort of a very deterministic idea. I think actually we should call more sort of a natural resource trap or something like that, because it's not deterministic at all. And as was mentioned by the ambassador, it has been sometimes a blessing and sometimes a curse, but with the right institutions and policies, it has been shown to be potentially a blessing. In fact, the last few years, we have seen that many oil countries have been doing well because of of course, partly because of the price of oil. And in particular, Ecuador has been doing very, very well in economic terms. So that is encouraging and shows that there is the potential for not falling into a trap or having it as a curse. Of course, that doesn't mean that there are not still very important challenges. And in particular, I think there are two big challenges. There are many others, and Professor Frankel, who is an expert, will talk about them. But in particular, two I think are very important. One is how to diversify an economy that has a significant dependence on oil and other mineral resources, which is really tough, as we have learned from the past. Many countries have failed in their attempts to diversify. Another big problem that is very much related to the diversification issue is managing the volatility. You know, the price of oil is one of the most volatile commodity prices in the world, and managing volatility is very difficult. In the last few years, we have had a lot of volatility, but typically, relatively stable prices in the last few years, and a very high level. So that's easier to manage than, volatility going down and in circumstances in which the prices are low. So it's a different story. So the challenge probably remains. And one of the big questions that I have is how not only Ecuador, but other Latin American countries that are dependent on resources will fare if the price of commodities starts to decline significantly. How prepared are we to manage that? And in particular, in the case of Ecuador, you have the particular challenge that since it's a dollarized economy, dollarization makes it particularly complex to manage an external shock like the decline in the price of oil. So I think that will be one issue that. Welcome. Bienvenido. So that's what I wanted to mention. So I proceed with presenting our two panelists that we have. Professor Falconi here. So Professor Jeffrey Frankel is the Harper Professor of Capital Formation and Growth at the Harvard Kennedy School. He directs the program in international finance and macroeconomics at the National Bureau of Economic Research, where he's also on the Business Cycle Dating Committee, which officially declares recessions. So you can blame him for some of the recessions that we have had.
Don't shoot the messenger.
He served as the Council of Economic Advisors twice, which is one of the highest positions that an economist can have in public office in this country. Before coming to Harvard in 1999, he was professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley. He's actually from California, from San Francisco. He currently serves on the advisory panels of the Federal Reserve Banks of New York and Boston. And his research interests include international finance, commodities, currency crisis, monetary policy, fiscal policy, regional blocs, and international environmental issues. He graduated from Swarthmore College and receives his economics PhD from next door in MIT. He has worked a lot with these issues of the natural resource curse, and I assigned his excellent paper overviewing the issue, so I know how good his presentation is going to be. I don't want to create over expectations for that. So usually it's better to under promise and over deliver than the opposite. So, we have Professor Falconi. So we have a very good combination because we have an expert from Ecuador. He's a professor and a researcher at Flaxo, the Latin American Faculty of Social Science in Quito, Ecuador, which is a very prestigious institution that has regional importance. He has an expert on ecological economics, so also very much to the issue that we'll be talking today. Professor Falconi has a bachelor's in economics from the Catholic University of Ecuador and a master and a PhD in economics from the Autonomous University of Barcelona in Spain. He has been on the faculty of Flaxo for more than a decade, and he has served as both National Secretary of Planning and Development and Minister of Foreign Affairs in the administration of President Rafael Correa. He, I have to say, is one of the most influential thinkers in the Revolución Ciudadana movement that has led President Correa. So it would be really interesting to have these alternative views from an expert in the resource course at the international level, and Professor Falconi telling us a little bit more with a different perspective on ecological economics, but also with a lot of knowledge, not only in studying the economy of Ecuador, but actually being a policymaker in Ecuador. So I'm very glad to have you both, and we will start with Professor Frankel, and then we will move to Professor Falconi. The rules are that we have 20 minutes for each presentation, and then we will have about 15 minutes time for questions. So can someone tell Professor Frankel when he is 5 minutes? Can you tell Professor Frankel when he has sort of 5 minutes? Someone, or I can do it.
Each of them will have 20 minutes.
Yes. No, I mean when they are.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
I've got my watch.
Okay. So please, Jeff.
Not as good to discipline myself, but. So thank you, Francisco, for that introduction. Thank you all for coming and for. I'm not sure whether to welcome our visitors from Ecuador, since I represent the host institution, or to thank you for hosting us at this day of Ecuador at Harvard. But either way, it's a pleasure to participate, and it's an honor to lead off the first panel. I don't know Ecuador, so I sort of apologize for that. Maybe the reason I'm leading off is because I'm only qualified to give a more general view about natural resources and the kinds of problems that have faced other countries with them. And we're talking about oil and minerals and agricultural commodities, and also the policies that other countries have adopted, and some of which have been successful and some of which haven't. And this is a subject I've been thinking about some in the last few years. So I agree with the ambassador and Francisco Minaldi that the phrase curse, and most of the people who write in this area, I think, realize that it doesn't have to be a curse. It can be a curse or a blessing. And perhaps too much ink has been spilled on whether that's an accurate term or not. But just to agree on what we're talking about, many countries that are richly endowed with oil, minerals, fertile land, have failed to grow more rapidly than those without natural resources. And it seems to be especially true with oil, as Francisco mentioned. And there are studies that find a negative effect, or at least correlation, and maybe more careful studies that might find some causality, although it's disputed. Negative effect of oil on economic performance. And we're usually not just talking about total GDP, but some measure that takes into account whether it's broadly shared in the economy. So you can find certainly recent periods when Angola or Equatorial Guinea has been doing great by GDP, but I don't think we really want to count that since it's not widely shared. You can look at the Human Development Index too. The contrast, of course, between the commodity producers, the oil producers, on the one hand, is with East Asian economies. On the other hand, many of which have achieved Western-level standards of living, despite having virtually no exportable natural resources. So Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, Taiwan, these are rocky islands or peninsulas with very little in the way of natural resources. And yet, followed by China, which has got some, but and yet, of course, they've done very well. Here's a graph. This is from the survey that I wrote not long ago that Francisco mentioned. It shows over 40 years. The horizontal axis is the share of fuels, ores, and metals as percentage of merchandise exports on average during this period. That's the horizontal axis. And the vertical axis is the average growth rate. Now, the point isn't that there is a strong or statistically significant negative relationship. There isn't, and aside from whether you could assert causality. But the point is there isn't a strong positive relationship. And, we might have thought that countries that have the advantages of these resources would do better than others. And if anything, the relationship seems to be slightly negative. Here are some of the oil producers. This is Venezuela, not just oil producers, Gabon, Iran, Saudi Arabia. very high concentration in oil and not impressive growth rates. Up here are some of the East Asian countries, China, Korea, Thailand, very low natural resources and some of the best performance. So that kind of makes dramatic the contrast. Again, it's not significantly negative, and we haven't said anything yet about causality. Here's Ecuador, appropriate for a country on the equator. It's right in the middle.
In the center.
In the center, right, which is also in the title of this conference of the day, and also in the title is it possible? Well, of course it is possible to escape the natural resource curse, and many countries have done it. I mean, the best performing country in continental Africa is Botswana, whose economy is heavily oriented around diamonds. The economy that's been best performing in Latin America over some period of time is Chile, which of course is heavily dependent on copper and some other minerals. So it certainly is possible. Natural resources are not necessarily bad. It's a double-edged sword with benefits and dangers, and this is really should be the starting point. And the priority should be on identifying ways to sidestep the pitfalls that have afflicted some other commodity producers in the past, and to find the path of success. That's really what should be guiding us. As I mentioned, some have avoided the pitfalls of commodity wealth. And my own view, by the way, is it's not necessary to choose between commodities versus manufacturers versus services. All three can be developed. You don't have to try to, abandon commodities. Australia, Canada, even the United States are very rich in natural resources and have done very well out of them at the same time as industrializing and eventually developing the service sector. And others like Chile and Malaysia have followed in that path. Two examples. I mentioned Chile with copper. I mentioned Botswana with diamonds. It's not just that they're sort of the star performers in their region. And by the way, that graph through, I should back up. I need to do an updated version of this graph. I know that both Ecuador and Peru have done pretty well lately, and so maybe they climb up above it, climb a little higher now. But I am going to talk about Chile and Botswana as two examples of countries that have been the star performers in their regions, and they have done some specific innovations that I think are worth emulating. That's what I'm going to focus on, is specific policies and institutions. Which ones seem to help to avoid the curse, and especially dealing with large price swings, because we know what part of the problem is that commodities are highly volatile. Determined on world markets, and coping with that volatility is a big part of it. This is going to be very brief, kind of overview. I say a lot more in my surveys and other recent work. I'm going to talk about some policies that are recommended that, as I see it, have worked successfully by many countries. And some are devices to hedge risk, to manage it, not to eliminate it or suppress it, but to cope with it, to try to avoid a situation where you're highly vulnerable, as many countries in Latin America and Africa are right now, to the possibility of a sudden fall in commodity prices. What would that do to your economy? So some on devices to hedge risk, some on ideas to reduce macroeconomic procyclicality, because I come from macroeconomics, and part of the problem with many of these countries in the past has been macroeconomic policies that are pro-cyclical. So by macroeconomic, I mean monetary policy, fiscal policy, exchange rate policy. And by pro-cyclical, I mean exacerbating the swings, making them worse than they have to be. So if the world market for your commodity, oil or copper, is booming, you're going to be booming. And if it's crashing, you're going to crash. But you would like macro policy to dampen those swings rather than exacerbate them. And in the past, all too many commodity producers, especially in Latin America, have had policies that exacerbate the swings. And a little bit about institutions for better governance in the area of managing commodity wealth. I also have a list of policies that are not recommended, and we don't have time to go into great detail, but I want to get specific enough to make it interesting. By the way, we have one seat here. Other people standing in the back. One seat in the second row. And if I had to generalize across all the policies that the institutions that are not recommended, what they mostly have in common is an effort to try to suppress volatility, to eliminate it from existence, which isn't possible if you are producing a commodity like oil, whose price is mostly determined, I mean, leaving OPEC aside, is determined on world markets. Okay, so I've got six recommendations. The first category is devices to share risks, efficient sharing of risks rather than the producer country bearing the entire risk. One of them is widely done already, index contracts. If you're making a contract with a foreign company, to sell them your oil or to develop the oil, it's trouble if the price is set at a fixed rate in whether it's local currency or dollars, because then if the world price, if the price goes up, the country wants to renege. If it goes down, the other company wants to renege, and the contract often breaks down. You can go for years. I think Bolivia did this with not doing business, and everybody loses from that. So it is more effective if you can build in automatically ahead of time some provision that if the world commodity price goes up, the price in the contract goes up, and if it goes down, it goes down. And it has to be the right price. In the world today, we've got a divergence between natural gas prices, at least in the U.S., but even more broadly because of fracking, and oil prices. And particularly countries that do business with Russia are selling natural gas at prices that are linked to the price of oil. And or Russia's trying to do it and impose this on other countries. And that's not. It shows you the trickiness of picking the right thing to index to. Second, hedge commodity revenues in options markets. Now, the more obvious thing that an economist might first think about is using the futures markets. If you know how much oil roughly you're going to sell over the coming year, and the question is you don't know what price, how much you're going to pump over coming 5 years, and you don't know exactly what the price is going to be, you could lock it in using the futures markets. And some countries have tried that. Mexico tried it, but it tends. It doesn't work all that well. And one reason it doesn't work all that well is even if the whoever it is, the finance minister, the oil minister, economy minister, has done a brilliant job of hedging so that if the price of oil goes up or down on world markets, the country is insulated either way. Nobody notices, the public, his fellow cabinet members, don't really notice when the world price goes down that he succeeded in protecting them against that. But if the world price goes up and everybody comes to him saying, oh, good, we have all this money now, here's all the things we want to spend it on, and he says, well, we hedged it. You did what? And he tries to explain, and even if he did it exactly right, all they hear is the minister somehow gambled away our national patrimony on the derivatives markets. So the futures tend not to work so well, but options do work better. And Mexico has experimented successfully with this, because the advantage of options prices is options contracts, of course, is that you can hedge away the downside while keeping the upside. A third one is for countries that are borrowing on world markets. We've seen a lot of talk about the move away from borrowing in dollars, which has got the problems of original sin and currency mismatch, to borrowing in local currency. But any of those has the problem that you're vulnerable to swings in the price of the commodity you're producing. And let's say you're a West African country that is borrowing a lot to develop oil. You've discovered oil. It's going to take 10 years. You need to import a lot of capital equipment, exploration and drilling equipment and pipelines and all that. So you need to borrow a lot. Well, I think that more countries should, and hardly anyone's done it, which is a puzzle, link the debt not to local currency, not to dollars, but to the price of oil. So if the price of oil goes down, and your revenues go down at the same time that your debt service obligations go down. If it goes up, then you're automatically hedged. And I think if more countries had done this in the 90s, we would have had fewer, and 80s, we would have had fewer debt crises. And it's a bit of a mystery why, to me, why it hasn't been done more often. I think there's a role for the World Bank to be the intermediary to kind of get the critical mass and get this going. So those are my three ideas to share risks. Then I've got two that are macroeconomic. I mentioned that most commodity producers, particularly in Latin America, in the past have followed pro-cyclical macro policies, expanding during booms and contracting during when the commodity prices go down, which is exactly backwards. And I've got some nice graphs about this. I've got two proposals. In the case of monetary policy, well, let me start. In the case of monetary policy, you want to allow the currency to appreciate during commodity booms and depreciate during commodity busts to accommodate the shifts in the terms of trade. And cushion the effect of both on domestic output and employment and on the balance of payments. Well, many of the popular monetary regimes don't have that property. A fixed exchange rate obviously doesn't by definition. Monetary targeting, money supply targeting, which some Latin American countries still say they do, doesn't and is vulnerable to velocity shocks. And the alternative that's been popular for the last 20 years, inflation targeting, also doesn't have that property. If the index is a CPI, which it usually is in all the various forms of inflation targeting. So I'm trying to push as an alternative for kind of middle-income, middle-sized countries, nominal GDP targeting, which has been discussed a lot for U.S., U.K., Japan, Euro, but has not been discussed for developing countries. And I actually think developing countries are the best candidates for it, because developing countries are the ones that have bigger supply shocks, bigger natural disasters, bigger fluctuations in the terms of trade, huge fluctuations in the terms of trade. And that's where nominal GDP targeting kind of does better. Now, I should say that's not really relevant to Ecuador. This is if you have a floating exchange rate. And many of the countries, a majority of the countries in Latin America, South America, after the crises of the 90s, moved away from exchange rate targets towards floating exchange rates. And so I'm really thinking about them. Ecuador moved the opposite direction, and it's not really an option with a dollarized country, and probably for good reasons, the past history of monetary instability and the small size. Fiscal policy, I think, is a little more relevant. Here I'm saying emulate Chile. Now, I have the impression that countries in South America get a little tired of people saying, holding up Chile as a model. But they have been pretty successful. And they have a very specific institution for fiscal policy that I think many countries, and not just South America commodity producers, by the way, I think we advanced countries could learn a lot from this. Because since the turn of the century, the advanced countries, at least some politicians in the US and the UK and Euroland, have been following pro-cyclical policies rather than counter-cyclical policies, and I think we could learn from this as well. Chile is one of the countries that managed to switch since the year 2000 from a record of pro-cyclical fiscal policy to now having counter-cyclical fiscal policy since the year 2000. That you allow deviations from a target budget balance only in response to permanent commodity price rises. If it's a temporary commodity price rise, then you have to save it. But the question is, a lot of countries have rules like this. The question is, who gets to decide? I've done some research on this. My angle is, who gets to decide when an increase in the price of copper, an increase in the price of oil is temporary or permanent? If it's the politicians that decide it, or civil servants that they report directly to the politicians, they tend to be overly optimistic in booms and think it's going to go on forever. So what I particularly like about Chile's institutions is that the responsibility for deciding whether the boom in GDP and the boom in the commodity price is temporary or permanent is delegated to independent councils of experts outside of direct political control. Well, my time is up, so that's James Meade, who originally proposed nominal GDP targeting, and there's Chile. I'm going to conclude with one slide which lists, good governance institutions. All right, two slides. Professional management of wealth funds. Norway, the pension fund is so often used as an example the countries are supposed to emulate, and there's some good reasons for that. The principle that the oil revenue is put in the government in the fund, and that only a certain share of it, 4%, which is probably too high estimate of the expected return these days, is given to the rest of the government to spend, and that they invest it all abroad so that you're diversified, so that your investments of your pension funds is not in the same place as the whole domestic economy, and to avoid cronyism in investments. So all of that, I think, is good about Chile, about Norway. But also, you want to insulate it from politics. And here I would not use the Norwegian fund as the model. And here's where I actually prefer Botswana's Pula fund as the model, because it's fully delegated to financial professionals who are told to optimize with respect to the rate of return and risk, and not to pursue social objectives. And I think that's the way you want to do it. All right, policies that have not worked so well. And I'm just going to list them without having time to elaborate any of them. But this is, anyone know who this is? This is King Canute, who was ordered the waves to stop coming in, and of course he did not. The waves did not obey him. So that's the overview. That attempts to just say there shall not be commodity price volatility generally fail because it's a fact of life. So I'm including producer subsidies, stockpiles, marketing boards, price controls, export controls. Like Argentina telling its farmers that when the world price of wheat and beef is really high, that's exactly when you can't sell. Blaming derivatives for your problems, resource nationalism, and banning foreign participation. And of all these, let me just pick out one, and I won't do the graph since I'm out of time unless it comes up in discussion section. But many oil producers subsidize fossil fuels. Worldwide, it's something like $70 billion of subsidies for fossil fuels. And this is lose, 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 lose. It's bad for efficiency, it's bad for growth, it's bad for the budget, it's bad for the environment, and it's even bad for inequality, which is the first thing people say. Far less than 20% of the benefits from gasoline subsidies or diesel subsidies go to the 20% lowest income. And countries recognize this, are trying to phase it out, Mexico, Indonesia, but they're still there in many countries, and I think this should be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have 20 minutes for Professor Falconi.
Father Falconi is going to speak in Spanish, so if anybody needs the transmitter for simultaneous translation, the equipment is back there, so just feel free to go and pick one if you need it.
Buenos días con todos y todas. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer la gentil invitación de la embajadora Nathalie Celi, también de Sandra Naranjo, quien es la presidenta de la Asociación de Ecuatorianos de aquí en Cambridge. Y un gusto estar en este panel, especialmente con tan distinguidos expositores. Básicamente, la idea central que yo voy a plantear alrededor de la idea de la maldición de los recursos naturales, o esta paradoja de la abundancia, que ya le explicó bien el profesor Frank, es básicamente la idea de que estamos en un nuevo momento en América Latina, alrededor de lo que se llama el superciclo de las mercancías, y luego voy a explicar en qué consiste ello, y que quizás si no se aprovecha bien ese momento histórico y económico, América Latina puede desperdiciar otra oportunidad en términos de su visión de desarrollo. En ese contexto, la reflexión va a ser más una reflexión latinoamericana, topando algunos aspectos esenciales de la economía del Ecuador. La exposición tiene 3 puntos centrales. Primero, plantear la paradoja alrededor de los temas de recursos naturales, respecto a su maldición o bendición, topar algunos elementos centrales de la experiencia latinoamericana y luego plantear cómo lograr un conjunto de transiciones virtuosas en materia de desarrollo. Como ustedes saben, a partir de inicios de la década pasada, hay un boom de precios en general de los commodities, tanto de los precios de las materias primas como de los alimentos. Hay mucha divergencia en conocer cuál es el origen de esta alza tan grande de precios de las materias primas. Para muchos tiene que ver la gran absorbedora y el crecimiento fundamental de la economía que se va a convertir quizás en la economía más grande del planeta, la economía china, que es una gran absorbedora de materias primas, con tasas de crecimiento, con una economía que crece a tasas cercanas al 8-9% en términos anuales, y absorbe una gran cantidad de recursos naturales. Hay otros quienes explican esta alza de precios desde un punto más bien de que estaríamos abordando ya una especie de renta de escasez, estas llamadas curvas de Hubert, que estaríamos en la fase decreciente de las curvas de Hubert, y por lo tanto los precios estarían reflejando una escasez relativa y eso explicaría sus precios altos. Hay otras explicaciones también. El hecho concreto es que América Latina, los países que tienen importantes dotaciones de recursos naturales, se han beneficiado de una renta extractiva a partir de inicios de la década pasada. Y en términos generales, esa renta ha traído beneficios, es decir, hay países que han utilizado adecuadamente esa renta y ha habido logros importantes en reducción de pobreza y en reducción de inequidad. De hecho, los últimos reportes sistemáticamente de la Comisión Económica para América Latina, la CEPAL, destaca a América Latina como una región que crece a ritmos importantes, a ratos superior a la media mundial y con logros importantes en materia de equidad, salvo concretamente 2 países que suelen estar ahí generalmente en dificultades, que es Costa Rica y Colombia. El resto de países latinoamericanos logra reducciones de pobreza y logra reducciones de brechas. No obstante, aquí hay una primera paradoja. Mientras hay logros importantes en materias distributivas, en materias de logros sociales, la primera paradoja es que la mayoría de países de América Latina enfrenta problemas en su cuenta corriente, en su balanza de pagos. Y de otro lado, como veremos luego con algunas gráficas, hay problemas debido al esfuerzo que hacen estas economías en términos extractivos, ya que eso implica un esfuerzo en la economía real y también tiene un conjunto de connotaciones en el resto del sistema económico. Voy a evitarme un poco esto porque el profesor Franklin lo explicó bastante bien. Como ustedes saben, la paradoja de la abundancia se sostiene fundamentalmente en que los países con dotaciones importantes de recursos naturales tienen en general un menor crecimiento relativo en el resto de otros países y por ende se desarrollan menos. Esto produce una especie de enfermedad holandesa, los tipos de cambio se aprecian, hay un abaratamiento de las importaciones, se encarecen las exportaciones y esto genera también una economía, como se explicaba, con un conjunto de secuelas internas. Esto de una u otra manera es así, digamos, cuando uno mira la historia, por ejemplo, económica del Ecuador en los años 70, la apreciación del tipo de cambio en los años 70 provocó los típicos rezagos o problemas clásicos de una enfermedad holandesa. Y a veces se suele decir también que hay una maldición del carbono, es decir, países con dotaciones importantes de recursos naturales también emiten más dióxido de carbono por unidad de producto y por lo tanto son más ineficientes en términos de sus composiciones relativas. Yo creo que esto de una u otra manera es cierto, perdón, es cierto. Yo creo que algunos de los fenómenos ligados a la maldición de recursos naturales efectivamente se expresan en lo interno de las economías, de los sistemas económicos, pero a ratos se olvida y se omite en estas explicaciones todo un conjunto de factores externos que tienen que ver con la gobernanza internacional, con las reglas del comercio internacional, con la división internacional del trabajo y nuestro rol de proveedores de materias primas en esos circuitos internacionales, y también con esta idea que luego lo explicaré con más detenimiento, alrededor de la maldición del carbono. Efectivamente, cuando hablamos de problemas internos, creo que hay que hacer un desglose mejor por países. Me parece que no podemos generalizar y desde mi punto de vista esto es lo que suele pasar con ese tipo de estudios empíricos, que es en donde se cruzan, digamos, 2 variables, el crecimiento económico en términos relativos y el peso específico de los recursos naturales o en algunos casos la dotación de los recursos naturales para, con una correlación bastante simple, ver que no existe una relación, digamos, directa entre crecimiento económico y dotación de recursos naturales. Creo que por una parte tenemos que enfrentar los problemas de disponibilidad de recursos. No es lo mismo un país que tiene unas reservas extractivas, digamos, petroleras como Venezuela para más de 60, 80 años, que un país que tiene una dotación de recursos naturales finita o escasa en el tiempo para 12, 15 años. Pero también depende mucho de la oferta, digamos, del peso de esos recursos naturales en la composición del sector externo de cada una de las economías. Hay países que tienen pesos específicos del 90%, es decir, absolutamente concentrados en términos de su oferta o su canasta exportable en recursos naturales, y otros que tienen economías mucho más diversificadas, como el caso de Brasil o el caso de México. También depende si los países optimizan o no ese esfuerzo o esa renta extractiva. Optimización, digamos, en términos económicos, al estilo de Hotelling, de la regla de Hotelling. Si los países logran mejores niveles extractivos, mejores usos de sus recursos energéticos y los destinan, digamos, a un uso sustentable. Esto tiene que ver, por ejemplo, la transformación que se puede hacer de una renta extractiva en términos de construcción de infraestructura productiva o de generación de oportunidades, de opciones para sus sociedades. Esto es básicamente inversiones sostenidas en el campo educativo, en el campo de salud. Entonces, creo que dependen de muchísimas condiciones para especificar cuando estamos hablando de dotación o abundancia de recursos naturales y sus efectos directos en crecimiento y más aún en desarrollo, que es un concepto evidentemente cualitativo. Desarrollo nos hace alusión a generación de oportunidades, de opciones que se distancia, digamos, del mero crecimiento económico, que es expansión de los sistemas. Pero el punto que más me interesa precisar tiene que ver con aquellos factores externos. Es decir, estas ideas de la maldición de recursos naturales, que por cierto en América Latina cada vez aparece una mayor literatura sobre el tema y un mayor debate sobre el tema. Hay mucha literatura que se ha escrito sobre recursos naturales en los últimos 5 años, justamente a propósito de este boom de recursos naturales. El punto central, desde mi punto de vista, es que se omiten las reglas de un comercio internacional que muchas veces aparece como injusto y asimétrico. Pero también se omiten, digamos, aspectos que tienen que ver con elementos esenciales ligados a la división internacional del trabajo y a nuestro rol como proveedores de materias primas en esa división internacional del trabajo y compradores de tecnología, de innovación y de conocimiento. Esto no implica echar la culpa a nadie, porque finalmente cada país es autónomo y decide su propia lógica de política pública, pero también creo que hay factores externos que deben ser puestos en la balanza y en el análisis cuando hablamos de los temas de bendición o maldición de los recursos naturales. El otro elemento fundamental tiene que ver con aquella idea de si nos estamos desacoplando en términos del uso de energía y materiales, que sería la otra derivación de la maldición de los recursos naturales. Es decir, también tendríamos una especie de maldición de carbono. Seríamos economías que no estamos siendo eficientes en el uso de los recursos de los materiales de energía. Y aquí, digamos, podemos ver una gráfica, podemos ver una gráfica donde básicamente se está haciendo una relación entre el consumo de energía y el Producto Interno Bruto. Esto es lo que se conoce generalmente como la intensidad de energía. Y lo que explicaría esto es la cantidad de energía que nosotros estamos requiriendo para producir una unidad de Producto Interno Bruto. Como ven, esta es una gráfica larga en el tiempo que nos permite ver básicamente que los países en general, independientemente de su ingreso, en este caso los datos provienen del Banco Mundial, independientemente de sus niveles de ingreso, en general logran procesos de desacoplamiento o de mejoras en términos de eficiencia energética. Esto evidentemente tiene mucha mayor connotación en las economías ricas que tienen procesos de innovación o ahorro de energía que producen estos desacoplamientos. Sin embargo, cuando cambiamos la escala de análisis y nos vamos hacia el uso global de energía, vemos como básicamente en general en el mundo se utiliza más de energía. Y esto hace alusión a una paradoja en economía que se llama la paradoja de Jevons. Gibbons ya explicaba con bastante propiedad de esto en 1860, en este libro fabuloso que es The Coal Question, la cuestión del carbón. Gibbons decía, en ese momento había el cambio hacia energía, los hidrocarburos iban a sustituir al carbón, y Gibbons decía con mucha propiedad que si bien eso va a traer procesos más eficientes en términos tecnológicos, lo que va a provocar es finalmente unos mayores niveles de consumo de energía. Y eso es básicamente lo que se observa en el mundo actual. Es decir, puede ser que haya mayor eficiencia en el relativo, pero en términos absolutos hay un mayor uso de energía. Para ponerle en un lenguaje muy coloquial, muy simple, los autos son cada vez más eficientes, pero hay más autos en el mundo. Entonces esto provoca impactos ambientales profundos. Esto está aparejado con toda una discusión internacional alrededor de esto que se llama la tercera era del carbono. De hecho, el profesor Michael Clare ha planteado esta idea de la tercera era del carbono, es decir, que si bien podríamos tener procesos más eficientes en los próximos años, vamos a tener una mayor intensidad en el uso de energía, fundamentalmente no renovable, producto del abaratamiento de determinados procesos productivos. Con estos antecedentes quisiera un poco entrar en 2 o 3 ideas centrales alrededor de lo que ha ocurrido en América Latina en este contexto de boom de precios de las materias primas y alimentos. Primero, esta es una gráfica que nos muestra el peso específico de América Latina en el contexto del comercio internacional. Aquí hay varias ideas importantes, digamos, alrededor de esta gráfica. Espero que se puedan observar bien los colores, pero hay algunas ideas centrales en esta gráfica que proviene desde los años 60. Primero, América Latina pierde peso o mantiene invariante su peso en el comercio internacional. El peso de América Latina en el comercio internacional fluctúa entre el 5 y el 6%, invariante desde los años 60, incluso con un ligero decaimiento. El segundo fenómeno importante en términos de comercio internacional es la pérdida de dinamismo o la pérdida de peso de la economía norteamericana en el comercio internacional. El tercer elemento, que quizás es mucho más familiar para todos, es el ascenso fundamental de los llamados países BRICS, Brasil, Rusia, India, China, Sudáfrica, y fundamentalmente el ascenso de China como una realidad económica global. Esta lámina nos permite observar otro tipo de descomposición alrededor del comercio latinoamericano. La gráfica fundamentalmente nos hace alusión a la forma como está estructurado el comercio exterior latinoamericano. Y ahí la descomposición viene de esta base de datos fabulosa que tiene la CEPAL, que se pueden hacer análisis para todos los países, que es la base de datos de materias primas de Naciones Unidas, del Comtrade. Y básicamente el gráfico de barras es la composición entre bienes de alta tecnología, baja tecnología, materias primas, manufacturas de mediana tecnología y manufacturas basadas en recursos naturales. Es interesante observar en esta gráfica cómo en los años 2000, América Latina, o antes de los años 2000, perdón, en los años 90, América Latina logró cierta diversificación de su oferta exportable. Es decir, bajaron el peso de las materias primas y hubo un mayor peso de los bienes ligados al conocimiento, la innovación y a la tecnología. Pero a partir de los años 2000, que coincide con el alza de precios, se produce un fenómeno que también la CEPAL le ha denominado reprimarización de las economías. Es decir, un mayor peso del sector externo basado en recursos primarios en su oferta exportable. Es decir, paradójicamente, mientras América Latina venía haciendo un esfuerzo interesante de diversificación, los altos precios provocaron una mayor concentración de su oferta exportable con los consiguientes problemas en términos de especialización. Evidentemente, la especialización ligada a materias primas tiene un conjunto de problemas y de secuelas. Si bajan o suben los precios internacionales, esto afecta directamente al ingreso de las economías y así sucesivamente. Pero quizás más importante y más interesante que la lámina anterior es este esfuerzo que ha hecho el Programa de Naciones Unidas de lograr consolidar los flujos de comercio en términos de toneladas, en términos del esfuerzo físico de lo que implica la extracción interna de materiales en América Latina. Esto está publicado ya por el Programa de Naciones Unidas, que es un gran esfuerzo por catalogar el comercio exterior latinoamericano en términos de peso, en términos de toneladas, y hay un conjunto de artículos científicos como los de West y Shandal que están publicados en Ecological Economics, donde también se advierte este mismo fenómeno de un peso creciente extractivo en términos de las economías latinoamericanas. A diferencia de las láminas anteriores que veíamos la composición del comercio internacional en términos de dólares, en términos de moneda, aquí estamos viendo en términos del peso. Y eso tiene una implicación muy importante en los temas de sustentabilidad ambiental, porque un esfuerzo extractivo evidentemente tiene un esfuerzo en la economía real y también afecta con un conjunto de externalidades en los sitios donde se producen los procesos extractivos. Por el tiempo voy a ir un poquito más rápido, me falta muy poco tiempo para terminar, pero básicamente esta lámina lo que mide es el desbalance físico de las economías latinoamericanas en términos de su comercio exterior. Y ustedes ya pueden ir un poco viendo los argumentos que estoy planteando. Es decir, un boom de precios que genera un dinamismo económico, logra efectos positivos en términos de reducción de pobreza e inequidad, pero de otro lado se producen un conjunto de afectaciones sociales y ambientales por el esfuerzo extractivo de este tipo de economías y la forma como están insertas en los mercados internacionales. Y para terminar, digamos, voy a plantear algunos elementos que quizás podrían permitir y dar paso a un mejor diálogo entre todos. Creo que hay un conjunto de factores externos que pesan en nuestra inserción internacional y eso está ligado con un conjunto de reglas comerciales, de la forma como estamos insertos, de la forma como nosotros nos estamos planteando nuestra visión de integración regional y las distintas visiones que hay sobre el tema en materia de comercio. No lo voy a topar mucho este tema, espero que más bien salgan en la parte de intercambio de ideas mutuas, de preguntas y respuestas, las formas y las distintas visiones que tienen los países de América Latina, que no son unívocas, no son únicas, para enfrentar los problemas de inserción internacional a través de sus dos grandes bloques, sea la Alianza del Pacífico o el Mercosur, para enfrentar las realidades de comercio internacional. El otro punto, evidentemente, tiene que ver con qué hacer, digamos, en términos de transiciones adecuadas para nuestros países, para evitar esta dependencia ad infinitum de recursos naturales. Y me parece que aquí los puntos claves de la discusión están alrededor de la diversificación de la oferta exportable, de la no intervención en aquellos sitios donde puede haber afectaciones sociales y ambientales altas ligadas a los procesos extractivos, y fundamentalmente al traspaso intertemporal de rentas extractivas hacia sectores dinámicos o hacia sectores ligados al conocimiento. Creo que alrededor de esos aspectos se puede generar una discusión mucho más adecuada alrededor de nuestra inserción internacional y nuestros elementos ligados a esta idea de maldición o abundancia de recursos naturales. Muchas gracias.